Today, we talk pedigree on the Win Place Show. Salutations and welcome, friends. My name is Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace, and this is the Win Place Show, a program devoted to all aspects of horse racing and handicapping that is proudly part of the Trust the Profits media platform. Now, today we have a really special guest joining us on the Win Place Show, and this is something that we're going to be doing a little bit more in 2023, and that is having people from across the horse racing industry join us and share their knowledge and insights with our audience so that you can ultimately have a better understanding of not just handicapping and horse racing, but the entire industry in general. Now, before we get into our guest, just want to remind everyone to make sure to like this video, subscribe, provide your comments below about what you thought about the video and what you thought about our guest today. So with that being said, excited to welcome Jessica Tugwell to the Win Place Show. Jessica is a thoroughbred pedigree expert and the content manager for Little Bluebird Stables, which is a racehorse ownership partnership company that works with some really great and trusted horse people throughout the industry. Now, Jessica has been in the industry for a long time. She's actually interned up at the New York Racing Association up at Saratoga for 2 consecutive summers, and then worked in my neck of the woods, actually, with the Maryland Jockey Club at Laurel Park. All of this is to say she is a great analyst, and particularly a great analyst of thoroughbred pedigree, which is why I wanted to bring her on the show to talk about some of the real challenges and opportunities that exist right now in American thoroughbred pedigrees. You can find her on Twitter at the handle at StarryDay93, but right now you can find her on the Win Place Show. Jessica, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, great. So I always like to start off with our guests to just get a general background of their initiation into horse racing and horses in general. So in your case, I'm interested when you got interested in horses, and maybe in your case specifically when you got interested in horse pedigrees, because this is a world you've really dove into both feet.
Yeah, absolutely. I started really getting into horses when I was in 3rd grade and I read The Black Stallion, because up until that point, actually, I was very big as a kid on breaking gender stereotypes,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't like the every little girl wants a pony stereotype, so I was like, "Oh, I don't like horses. Horses are too girly for me." But then I read The Black Stallion, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, horses are so cool." And so that's how I really got into horses. And my dad has always been like a horse player and a handicapper. So it was kind of natural. In 2004, he was watching the Breeders' Cup. I was 11 years old.
Okay.
And he was watching the Breeders' Cup. So I was watching with him. And I saw this pretty black horse. And I remember seeing that pretty black horse win a race earlier in the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, I want this horse to win. And he's like, that horse is 30-1, but go ahead. You can pick him if you want. And that horse was Better Talk Now. And
Oh,
he won the
wow.
Breeders' Cup Turf. And that
Yeah.
was kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
And even prior to that, I had actually started getting into pedigree and genetics just for horses in
Mm-hmm.
general. I learned about, taught myself about horse color genetics. And so, like in 5th
Oh,
grade, one of my
wow. Yeah.
favorite pastimes was I would write out like color genetics and pretend, okay, so if I bred this horse with this horse, then this would be the
Mm-hmm.
color of their baby. And then if I bred this horse with this horse, that would be the color of their baby. And then I bred those, and this would be the color of their baby. So that was like my favorite pastime in 5th grade. So it kind of, after getting into horse racing, the
Yeah.
pedigree side of things was just a natural
Yeah.
side from things for me to get into.
That's really awesome. That's really cool. I think as kids, it's funny. I think as kids, we get so focused on certain things and we just get super nerdy on certain things. And so
Hmm.
for me, it was, I was introduced to horse racing at a young age, but for me, it was actually like fantasy baseball was something my dad introduced to me at like 8 or 9 years old, and just
Hmm.
memorizing just books worth of baseball statistics was just something I prided myself in as a 9-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
So I could have conversations with the adults in the room sometimes. But so moving a little bit ahead in your career, as I mentioned in the introduction, you worked or interned, I should say, at NYRA for 2 summers. You worked at the Maryland Jockey Club. I think when I say something like NYRA, people, I have a feeling listening to this program probably think of the public face of NYRA and what they see on TV every day at America's Day in the Races, and whether they like or dislike Andy Serling and Everybody Loves Vacation and Maggie. But those are huge organizations that
Mhm.
are much more than what we just see as the public face. And so I'm curious kind of what your experience was at those two organizations and how it helped you learn about the industry in general.
Yeah, that was, both of those experiences were really great, huge learning experiences. For the Maryland Jockey Club, or well, first was NYRA. But yeah, so I got the internship at NYRA. I was 18, I think, at the time. And
Hmm.
that was a really cool experience. Just getting to see that was my first time really being involved in the industry and on a professional level. I had been
Hmm.
like a guest on TVG as a teenager,
Oh, wow.
done a little bit of stuff with them. But this was my first time getting paid to do anything in horse racing. And I, what it really gave me, I think, was a sense of confidence
Hmm.
because this was, my first day at work. Um, and we were watching the races in the press box because our job as interns was basically to pass out your daily notes and your race recaps. And then if there was a stakes race, then we helped get quotes and type those up.
Sure.
So a lot of the day was just spent hanging out with other interns watching the races. And, it was like the second or third race on the first day of the meet. And, someone who has literally grown up in horse racing is asking me for my opinion and
Hmm.
telling me like, "Oh, no, I can tell you know what you're doing. Like, who do you like here?" And things like
Yeah.
that. And that was really eye-opening for me
Yeah.
just, to feel like respected and feel like, "Oh, I do know what I'm talking about," because I was surrounded by people who were like born in the industry, grown up in the
Hmm.
industry,
Hmm.
and definitely I felt like kind of an outsider. I was like, "Do I know what I'm talking about?" Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that really gave me a lot of confidence about that. And it also was really cool just to get sort of the other side of racing, being able to go to the barn in the morning and stuff,
Hmm.
and get to talk to trainers and get to know trainers as people and not
Hmm.
just as
Yeah.
the first time I met Todd Pletcher, I was completely starstruck and like, oh my
Right.
gosh, it's Todd Pletcher. and
Yeah.
and kind of being able to, okay, now I can interview these people and I can ask them
Hmm.
questions and
Hmm.
hey, so what do you think about this horse? How did your horse run?
Hmm.
um, and things like that. So that was what I think I really got out of the New York Racing Association. And then working at the Maryland Jockey Club, I worked in the racing office there, and
Hmm.
that was a great experience just to learn how races come together,
Hmm.
which was something that doesn't really get talked about a lot. About condition books, and I knew how to read a condition book, but I didn't realize exactly how hard the racing office has to work at times to make a
Yeah.
race come together. And well, why did this horse end up in this race? Well, and it's something that can factor into my handicapping now, because it could be a horse where you're like, oh, this seems like this doesn't seem like a spot that they would have targeted, but maybe they were just trying to fill the race
Yeah.
or something, especially when you get multiple entries from a single trainer
Hmm.
and things like that that I hadn't thought about before, that now
Yeah.
I can factor into my handicapping and the way I look at races.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's funny. I talked to Jose Santos Jr., who's a jockey agent, about this a little bit when I chatted with him and interviewed with him. And you're right. It's absolutely something like putting a race together, and a horse kind of sticks out, and you go, "Why is this race?" And then thinking about, well, what's the next race this horse is probably going to target? And well, there wasn't a chance to get this horse on the turf anytime between now and then, and so this is the spot. And it's like, okay, and so you're right. It has a huge impact in the handicapping process. So I brought you on here to talk about pedigree, though. So let's dive into some of this pedigree talk. And I'm curious, you have a great blog up on the Little Bluebird stables, which I read over earlier this week, and just would encourage anyone to check out. And you have some general rules that you look for in horse race pedigree. And one of the examples you provided was you don't like to see inbreeding in the first three generations. And so I was curious, kind of maybe explain, we can start from there, but also kind of what are some other general rules that you look for, or things that strike your eye in particular when it comes to horse race pedigree?
Yeah. So yeah, for instance, the I prefer to stay away from inbreeding within the first three generations. It's not necessarily a hard rule for me,
Mhm.
but it's definitely there have been studies, a lot of studies done that show that close inbreeding negatively correlates with racetrack performance. Doesn't mean that you still can't get horses like Rich Strike, who
Mhm.
has Smart Strike in his third and second generation,
Mhm.
who are still really good horses. But as a rule, the close inbreeding I like to stay away from, because inbreeding in general is already a big problem in our sport,
Yeah.
as far as just the lack of genetic diversity.
Mhm.
So, but at the same time, there are also studies showing that distant inbreeding can help racetrack performance.
Interesting.
And so what I like to look for is, I define, lots of people have different definitions for line breeding and inbreeding. I've heard people say like it's line breeding if it works, um, and it's inbreeding if it doesn't.
Yeah.
But the way I consider it is if it's outside of the first 5 generations, then it's line breeding if it doesn't show up in your 5 cross pedigree,
Yeah.
which I think has the double effect of, one, you're getting similar genetic material, assuming that, like with pedigree, we're still playing with like the same deck of cards, so to speak, that
Hmm.
horses from the 1800s or earlier were, that we were playing with. It's just how have those genetics been shuffled.
Yeah.
So, getting a little tangential there, sorry.
No, 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 no,
But
not at all.
but yeah, so I'm looking for, okay, if these horses further back in the pedigree crossed well, and then they seem to have passed on positive traits because you have all these other members of the family coming down, and
Hmm.
then you have another horse over here who comes from that same stock further back,
Hmm.
but has had different genetics coming in that work
Right.
well with it. And that's why I focus a lot on female families, because something that has just really been started to get talked about in horse racing is the role of mitochondrial DNA,
Hmm.
which is passed down from mother to daughter. And if you might remember from biology class, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
It is.
It's what it's the part of the cell that converts food into energy.
Hmm.
And it doesn't take a lot of extrapolating to think how that might be useful for
Right.
horse racing. um,
Exactly.
so in theory, if you have horses from the same mitochondrial line, each horse is going to be a combination of mitochondrial DNA and then nuclear DNA from both parents.
Hmm.
And if you have a horse that's nuclear DNA matches well with this mitochondrial DNA, and you
Hmm.
breed it to another horse from the same mitochondrial line, but probably going to have differences in
Hmm.
the other genetics going on. But if they both work well with that same mitochondrial line that the baby is going to have,
Hmm.
then in theory, you're increasing your odds of having a good racehorse,
Yeah.
which is why I focus a lot on female families. I like to see female families repeated in a
Hmm.
pedigree without necessarily inbreeding, unless it's inbreeding to really key mares. Like
Okay.
Quiet American, for instance, is inbred to his third dam, I believe. I believe she's his third dam.
Okay.
On both sides of his pedigree, that same mare appears, Sekilo,
Okay.
and she was a really good racehorse and a great brood mare. And
Hmm.
so you see things like that, and it's a positive generally.
Yeah.
In my way of looking at things, I like to see that. And then there are also just certain families that you just see over and over again come up with quality. I usually look at the Bruce Lowe family numbers, which
Hmm.
were created by a guy called Bruce Lowe in I want to say the like early 20th century, I think it was,
Mm.
when he tallied up how many classic winners were from this family,
Right.
and this family, and then he numbered them.
Yep.
And so it's a really good way to easily keep track of female families even in the present. So that's kind of, I
Yeah.
look at certain female families that consistently produce quality. And in that case, even if there isn't necessarily a lot of quality up close, I'll still
Hmm.
give mares from those big families an extra look.
Yeah, that's a great point about that kind of more ancestral, if you will,
Hmm.
legacy there for broodmares who may not on first blush look like something particularly special. So I'm interested, when it comes to matching a stallion and a broodmare. Obviously, we see all sorts of numbers. I think we just saw Gunrunner covered up something like 250 broodmares over or something like that this past season. Yaupen out of nowhere covered up like 230. That's very bizarre to me, but that's
It's the
another
spendthrift
discussion.
effect.
Well, that's true. Yes, it is. But I would imagine there's a lot more than just matching up an awesome stallion with an awesome mare. So for the example, Malathat just retired. So just going, well, let's just pair Gunrunner and Malathat together. And I'm sure that'll be a great horse. I was kind of curious, talk me through kind of the decision of making the right choice, if you will, of breeding a particular broodmare with a particular stallion, and how it might not always just be go for the biggest two superstars and breeding them together, sort of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing, you'd like to look for precedent in a breeding. Has this worked before? Is kind
Hmm.
of really a first step type of thing. And if it's worked before, awesome.
Yeah.
There's also, and that's where you get concepts like nicking, which is how does this stallion do with offspring, with daughters of this other stallion?
Got it. Yeah.
And that's where you get products like True Nicks that
Hmm.
rate that and percentage wise, okay, compared to the average horse with, this cross with other stallions, how do they do? So that's something you can look at. Also, what has worked in the female family.
Hmm.
If, for instance, the mare, the dam of a horse if that horse has a half sibling by another stallion,
Hmm.
then obviously you might look toward there. There's a lot
Hmm.
of, there's also considerations of physicality. You don't want to breed two
Sure.
horses who look completely different because you're more likely to end up with a sort of Frankenstein of genetics
Yeah.
where the horse doesn't really look like one complete horse. Kind of looks
Right.
like parts of different horses put
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are certain things that you would take into account. Look at, okay, what stallion lines work well. For me, one of the first things I do is which stallions from this mare's family are around right now.
Mm.
Which stallion can I, if there's a really big female family early in the pedigree,
Hmm.
then okay, that's my target.
Hmm.
For instance, one of the really big families is Low Family 1X, tracing back to the mare La Reine. And she's the dam of Black Helen, second dam of Busher. There's 9 Hall of Famers tracing to the same mare.
Wow. Okay.
And some of the stallions right now that trace to her are More Than Ready, Super Saver, Flatter and Congrats, who just both recently passed, I believe.
Hmm.
Um, and then now you have horses such as Maxfield coming up, Game
Mm.
Winner,
Yeah. Yeah.
Forte. They all are from
Oh, okay.
this very same mare, distantly through the
Hmm.
tail mother to daughter tail female line. So, and you have horses then like California Chrome, whose dam was by a stallion from this family and Not for Love, and out of a
Hmm.
mare by a stallion from that family. So a lot of times, if
Yeah.
I see that family in a pedigree, I'll immediately look towards stallions like More Than Ready or Super Saver or
Hmm.
other stallions that bring that in. Munnings was another huge one
Oh, yeah.
from that female family.
Yeah, Munnings has been in the news a lot lately because that's the sire of Beverly Park,
Beverly
if I'm not
Park,
mistaken.
yeah.
And so everybody's been talking about the endurance that the
Hmm.
Munnings baby
Just like his
have.
sire. I mean,
Yeah,
Speightstown has 2 different Grade 1 winners at age like 7 or something.
it's
Rinaldo the
awesome.
Wizard and Switzerland.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I actually remember watching that race with where Switzerland won. That was a bit of a shocker. Um,
Hmm.
the So that's endlessly fascinating to me, and I think I'd love to talk to you just
I could
offline
talk
for
for
like
days
two
about
hours about
it.
this. Yeah, but but I don't think anybody's going to tune into like a 6-hour YouTube video. But that's another discussion for another day. But I'm curious. You mentioned a couple of names just now, but I'm curious whether or not there are certain stallions or brood mares that you're excited about that are maybe just starting their second career in that world, or maybe are flying under the radar in their first or second crops or something like that you really think are going to become more powerhouse or much more impactful brood mares or stallions later on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I already mentioned Maxfield and Game Winner. I
Mm-hmm.
think both of them are in line to be great stallions. They're both going to get the right chance, the right kind of mares in their first
Mm-hmm.
books to help them, reach their full potential. So I'm excited about them. I kind of wish we had done this a year ago because then I could sound really smart talking about Bolt de Oro. Um,
So
but
I
he's
will tell
already
you
kind of showed
very
his hand.
I will tell you a very funny story. So I used to teach political science, and I taught at the University of Texas El Paso. And one of my former students there actually helped train Bolt Doro
Oh, that's fun.
when he was like a baby, like when he was like I guess between 2 and 3, and they shipped him out to Montana and just like had him hang out and just like be on a farm for a while, or maybe between 1 and 2. And she was actually the one who ended up coming up with his name. Uh,
Oh,
so I've always had a huge just affinity for that horse. And I remember him running in the Derby and just, always supporting him throughout his career. And so I was thrilled to see all these great, successful Bolt Toro babies this year. And he's the a leading first crop sire right now.
Yep, beating out Justify.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really excited about him, and I'm really curious to see how his half brother Global Campaign does
Mm,
as a stallion. I do think that physically Bolt is a little bit more attractive looking, but
hmm
Global Campaign was also incredibly talented, and I think he's going to be really interesting, and he'll definitely be at a lower price point than Bolt Oro
Yes.
for
Yeah.
breeders.
Particularly after this year. Yeah, you're right.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but both they come from, again, a huge female family that has stallions such as Quality Road, Elusive Quality, Seattle Slew, Mr. Prospector. They're
hmm
all family 13C, and
hmm
that's the family that they're from. So that's a big stallion family. So I'm excited about that. I think that the one freshman sire who's running a little under the radar right now that I think is going, whose babies are absolutely going to get better with age, is Accelerate.
Oh,
I'm
interesting. Okay.
really excited about him as a stallion. He has a lot of female family line breeding going on in his pedigree. And as
Mm,
an individual, he was just so consistent for so long.
hmm
And I really like that in a stallion. And then next year or this coming year, I'm really excited to see the Flame Away babies.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I think they're going to be good. Again, I love his pedigree, and I love stallions that showed a lot of tenacity on the
hmm
racetrack. I feel like that really tends to, pass on to their babies. Like, you're kind of seeing that in a lot of the Bolt babies.
Yeah.
They're tenacious. They're gutsy.
Yeah.
And Flame Away was a lot like that. So I'm really excited about that, and the fact that he has a lot of versatility for surface and things like
hmm
that.
To that extent, I'm excited to see the Frenzy Fire babies to see if we get any more, savaging going on. You talk about
Yeah, right.
tenacity.
Yeah,
See if
exactly.
that part gets passed along. But that actually, I brought that up about Frenzy Fire, but he's standing over in Japan, if I'm not mistaken. And so that actually kind of gets to another question that I'm interested in getting your opinion on, which is, over the last several years, we've been seeing a ton of Japanese interest buying up American mares. I mean, we saw it again this year at the Keeneland November sales right after the Breeders' Cup, even though Japan didn't make the impact on the track that they made last year at the Breeders' Cup. They were just as active in the sales ring the next day. So I'm curious, kind of, what are your thoughts on the horses that they've been getting these last couple of years? And do you see this as being something that really could have a huge impact on American operations? I mean, to the point where, would American owners start looking overseas to Japan for horses in the future to bring over here? I mean, I'm just interested in their kind of global impact in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're already starting to see it with the way that Japan has been doing a lot more in global international racing on the dirt.
hmm
And I think that we'll continue to see that as they continue to, pad their rankings. The leading freshman sire in Japan right now is Mind Your Biscuits.
Yeah.
So and Dreyfong has also been doing really well.
Yeah.
So I think that it's going to lead to a lot more. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second.
Quite
But
all right.
yeah, a lot more. We're going to see them a lot more on the dirt. And I think that, to your point that about going back over and getting mares from there, I think that we should.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they don't, I think they should. That I think that's going to be really great, honestly, for the genetic diversity,
hmm
because they had, this sort of problem over there where every horse is by Sunday Silence.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
they need to find other lines, whereas over here you don't get a lot of Sunday Silence. Hopefully Yoshida is kind of going to
Oh,
be
yeah.
a big influence of that. I think he's out of a Sunday Silence mare, if I recall correctly. I can't
Yeah.
remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But and so I think that it's really interesting.
hmm
But I do think also that it isn't going to have a huge impact necessarily on American breeders. There are still plenty of mares, good mares being kept here stateside.
Yeah.
And I think it's just fun for the international
Yeah.
sport, for the yeah, being able to really be a global sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'll be excited next year when the Breeders' Cup is at Santa Anita, and presumably we'll see a pretty significant Japanese contingent there,
Hmm.
with it being back on the West Coast. And I agree, it makes it more fun that that it's more than just Aiden O'Brien and Charlie Appleby bringing over their monsters and then the
Hmm.
United States. So it'll be nice to have other people coming over. I mean, that's what made the drama of last year so
Yeah,
special. I mean, the
absolutely.
Marche Lorraine and Loves Only You. And so that was just two great moments, even though I was very sad about how the distaff turned out. But that's another discussion for another day. But while I have you here and we're talking about horses and pedigree, I would be remiss if I didn't have the chance to talk about the horse that everyone was a buzz about this past year, and that is kind of the multi-million dollar question, which is Flightline. This incredibly delicate, amazing specimen of a horse who, has a very limited track record on the track, but obviously was just spectacular in every way, shape, and form. But passing on greatness is tricky. We saw that with Secretariat. We've seen that with other great horses that may not have necessarily always produced great progeny and great offspring. And so I'm interested in your opinion. How effective do you think Flightline is going to be as a sire?
Yeah, I'm really curious to find out. I think that there is some definitely questions about just as far as his durability. That is a big question mark. If I was advising, I would want to see him going with mares that were, war horses that raced for seasons. And
Yeah.
I would love to see him get mares like that. I'm sure he will not get many mares like that, because a lot of times mares that are really good aren't going to be around for that long.
Yeah.
But ideally, I think you'd like to see that. I think that, in his racing career, he was really comparable to Ghost Zapper. And I think that as a stallion, that's kind of going to come back around, where I think he's going to be a good stallion. He has the credentials on pedigree. He is absolutely going to get some of the best mares in the country. So if he doesn't, that will be a surprise to me. If he just is a complete flop, I don't know how great he'll be necessarily. I'm not sure if he's going to end up at the top of the sire ranks.
Right.
I think it's just a kind of a shame that these are the kind of horses that are going to get the most mares. Whereas you have like other horses that, horses like Accelerate, for instance, who are around forever. And this is not really a very commercially sexy type of horse.
Yeah.
Like, people just aren't seeing that and going, oh yeah, that's going to be what I want to breed to.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is a result of the fact that we're breeding and racing to sell horses.
Yes.
Not to race them. And that's any horse by Flightline. If they look good physically, doesn't, and they have a good pedigree on paper, if they have a lot of black type there, they're going to be worth a lot of money. And it won't really matter if they can run or not, because they'll be worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of one of the main problems with the industry. And that's something that I think, I prefer, I guess, let's say, to look at like horses from a breed to race type of perspective. I really like smaller operations, just because I think that you can be a little more creative. You don't have to stick to one of the 5 top leading stallions in order to have any chance of selling the horse. Because a lot more than, those 5 to 10 stallions can produce a really good racehorse.
Absolutely. No, it's funny. I was just talking to Chase Sessions the other day, and he lives in Arkansas. We were talking about Arkansas bred horses, and growing up in Pennsylvania bred horses was a big deal. Maryland bred horses, Nick Sco, is always being advertised whenever I go to Laurel Park now, and things like that. So I think you're right. Looking past those top 5 or 10 and looking at those, smaller operations, and not just going to, every, the big farms in Kentucky, and understanding you can get these great race horses that come out of smaller operations, smaller barns. And I personally, those are the stories that I love to see in the sport as well. So,
yeah, my favorite stallion in the country stands for $1,000 in West Virginia.
Well, who's that?
Fibersond.
Okay.
He is a unbridled song half brother to Speightstown.
Okay.
And he has sired 2 graded stakes winners and another graded stakes placed runner. So many. He absolutely dominates the West Virginia bred races at Charlestown.
Yep.
But if you've heard of a West Virginia bred in the last 5 years, Run Into Love Ya, Muad'Dib, Late Night Powwow, all of them are by Fibersond.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was there at the Charlestown Classic this past year, where
that was awesome.
Finished second, if I'm not mistaken, to Art Collector.
Yeah.
And it was a cool moment, because Bill Mott, I think, spent more time talking about the second place horse than he did his own horse.
Yeah.
And wanted to make sure that he gave, he said, this is more than just a West Virginia bred. This is a really good racehorse. And so awesome to see. And there were a lot of people, a lot of fans of that horse there at the track that day, pulling for him. So I thank you so much for all your time with me today. But I wanted to finish up by talking a little bit about your current opportunity and job as content manager at Little Bluebird Stables, and interested in just hearing like what you do and how this all fits into the opportunities that Little Bluebird Stables has.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so excited when Joe reached out to me about working with Little Bluebird because I love their philosophy because they're working with good trainers who are good horsemen,
Mm-hmm.
and they know that they're not trying to compete with West Point and
Right.
things. We're not trying to win the Kentucky Derby. We're horse players trying to win races.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if those are claiming races, we're trying to go to the track and have fun.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the whole mindset is kind of the underdog sort of thing where, maybe we'll get lucky and we'll get a stakes horse for
Yeah.
$20,000 someday. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not what we're setting out to do, because that's, we're trying to also, have a reasonable point of entry
Mm-hmm.
for people to be able to get into the game. We're not trying to sell, 5% for 10 grand. We're,
Right.
trying to keep it more reasonable than that so that, people can just have fun and learn more about what the industry is like, what it's like to be an owner, how you can, have a good time with a claimer,
Yeah.
and how great it can be. Even if, our horse Excursion East, he only just broke his maiden,
Mm-hmm.
but he ran the New York Stallion series. And so
Oh yeah. Okay.
they got to do, things like that, and actually made money for his partners, finishing second and third as a New York bred
Mm-hmm.
in the purses there. So, I really just like their philosophy. And what I'm really doing for them mostly is we're trying to kind of expand into finding more ways to have just content,
Mm-hmm.
partner focused content, especially, telling the stories about our partners and trying to encourage people to get on board with us and come out to the track and have fun.
Mm-hmm.
We're not the people who are going to be in like the big classy boxes. We're more trying to like hang out at the bar and bet
Yeah.
and hang out with
Yeah.
the horse players, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the vibe. And I feel like I fit in great with that, with my pedigree philosophy and just the way
Mm-hmm.
I look at things. That I'm really excited for a lot of the fun stuff we have planned. We are doing contests and things right now. We're doing a promotion where if you buy one of our Kentucky bred yearlings, if you buy into them, you get entered into a drawing to win hotel and airfare for the Breeders' Cup next year.
Oh,
So,
excellent.
if
Yeah.
anyone's looking to, buy a horse, its shares start at $600.
Yeah, no, you never know. Trust me, we've all spent $600 on far more frivolous things than a racehorse, in
Exactly.
my opinion. So, no, that's awesome, Jessica, and I was so glad to see when you partnered up with them as well. And I can just say I think that you're right about the focus of the type of races. Not necessarily focusing on these big stakes races. And I can just tell you, having a couple of home tracks that I follow, I love following those hard knocking claiming horses and or optional claimers or allowance level horses that are just, they come back every 3-4 weeks to the same
Hmm.
circuit. You start to know them. You fall in love with them. This past year at Assiniboia, my dad would text me about horses like Big Tony and Mia Bear out of because they're running every week, just little things like that. So I love what y'all are doing with that. I think it's a great idea. And it's much more connected to the average everyday horse player
Exactly.
than something that's just stakes race that you're going to maybe get
Hmm.
into once or twice a year. So that's great. So Jessica, thank you again. Remind everybody where they can find you on Twitter before I let you go.
Yeah, absolutely. My Twitter handle is at StarryDay93. And then you can also check out my blog at bettertalknow.wordpress.com.
And she's got some great stuff, particularly about Flightline. I just saw up there on that. So if you want to read more, make sure to check that out. And we'll include a couple of links in the description of the video as well to Little Bluebird Stables. So you can potentially get that $600 if you want to enter, if you want to buy a share and get entered into that contest. So Jessica, thank you again so much for being on the show today, and all the best to you in 2023.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew. It was great talking with you. Thanks for having me.